Jewel looks back on the 25th anniversary of her debut album. The singer-songwriter's re-releasing Pieces of You, which featured the hits Who Will Save Your Soul and You Were Meant for Me. It came out in '95 but didn't become a commercial success until almost 2 years after its release. And that happened thanks in part to an iconic artist. First of all, how are you and where are you?
I'm very well, thank you. We are in my guest room in the Rockies.
Oh, okay. Awesome. How have things been going for you here? Everybody, I feel like, has a different, whether they're trying to work from home or trying to unplug from home, they're obviously at home for the most part. How have these last few months been for you?
I've been doing well. Thank you for asking. I work a lot in creating mental health tools for people and scaling digital tools. And they're so needed. Our crisis hotlines across the country are up 800%. So it's kept me very busy and definitely very grateful that I have a good meditation game during times like this.
You've mentioned in so many interviews throughout your career how you always wanted to avoid being a statistic. And now, obviously, through your work in this time that we're in, this pandemic, you're trying to help others, I would assume, from also becoming a statistic. How do you lean on your past experiences to help others?
I moved out very young when I was 15 and began paying rent. And I did know, statistically, kids like me end up repeating the cycle. I should have been in an abusive relationship or an addiction cycle. And so my life's mission became, how do you get to know your real nature if your nurture was bad? And what happens to kids like me that have no support group, have no access to therapy, or isolated? Is it possible for kids like me to be happy? And so that's what I set out to do. And the tools that I created ended up actually really working well for other people too, that don't have therapy or, again, these traditional access points. And it's been really rewarding. You know, as much as I love singing, I love developing these curriculums and helping people.
We look back here on this album that was released 25 years ago. It certainly was far from an overnight success. One of the things that I was intrigued about was, ahead of this album, you signing with Atlantic Records amid a bidding war. And I'm curious, what would the Jewel of 2020 tell the younger Jewel back then as this bidding war was happening between all of these different record labels?
It was a trip, to say the least, to be homeless and have every label coming down and getting in a frenzy, this bidding war. I was offered $1 million signing bonus, and I read a book about how the business works and realized it was a loan. And I turned it down because I had a very sober view. I was a folk singer at the height of grunge. The odds of that working were very slim, despite all of these labels seeming to think I was talented. I had a long road ahead of me. And so I made myself a promise, 2 promises. One was that I would put my health, my mental health, my happiness first, and have that be a full-time job, and my number 2 job be musician, and that I would always choose music over fame. And looking back in 25 years, I'm really proud that I never betrayed those 2 promises to myself. I always upheld those, and it led me to make really bold choices, like turning down $1 million and betting on myself and taking the biggest back end. It saved my career. I had no way of really knowing how important that decision was, but that record failed. And had I taken that $1 million, I would have been dropped for sure.
Do you remember the book that you read?
Yeah, it's called Everything You Need to Know About the Music Business.
Wow, easy enough. Yeah. That's incredible. So you ended up signing. What was it about the Atlantic Records deal that eventually got you to sign?
There was a guy named Danny Goldberg there at the time, and he had worked with a lot of singer-songwriters. And I told him my number 1 goal wasn't to be famous. It was to be a singer-songwriter. I was ambitious, but in a strange way. I wanted to be one of the best singer-songwriters of all time. That meant I had 60 years ahead of me of working at that. That's not a gimme with 1 record. That's something you look back and see if you did your job, 30 records in. And he saw that about me. And I made sure to structure that deal where the back end was rewarding if you sold records. And so I ended up getting given the biggest back end any artist had been given up to that point. And that did end up working out, thankfully.
Didn't work out at first. We mentioned again that this, certainly this album's success did not happen overnight. You released it in '95, but it really isn't until a year and a half, 2 years later that things start to take off. I guess I've read about it, but I'd love to hear in your own words the role that Bob Dylan played in the success of this album.
The album was considered a failure, and after a lot of discouragement, you know, opening for the Ramones and Everclear, solo acoustic, I finally decided to try and possibly make a second record. But before I did that, Dylan asked me to tour with him. And, you know, I was told he wouldn't watch my shows and meet me, which I understood. And I remember I was kicking people out of his audience. I'd always done that. I don't like people talking when I sing. I get that they're not there to see me, but I would ask them to leave until the headliner came on. So if I was just singing for 2 people, that was good with me. And Bob had heard about that and liked that I was kicking people out of his shows, I guess. And he ended up watching me. And he really encouraged me, mentored me, and talked to me after every show and gave me books to read and music to listen to and went over my lyrics. And he liked my lyrics and would say, what made you write that one? You know, it was a trip. And he really encouraged me to keep going, and that being a singer-songwriter is different. You may never get popular. You don't get to play the radio game like everybody else. You have to follow your muse in a very different way. And he gave me the courage to keep doing that.
That said, you ended up getting to play the radio game a little bit. What was it like when you first, I mean, and we should mention too that, you know, prior to this album's release, you know, I believe on the West Coast in San Diego, you had received some radio love, and there were performances of yours that were broadcast live on the radio and so on and so forth. And that was kind of how that, along with, you know, playing coffee houses and so on, or how you built your following. But what was it like after you broke through to mainstream radio, and maybe the first time that you heard your song on the radio?
The first time I heard my song on the radio, it was Who'll Save Your Soul, and it was played between Nirvana and Soundgarden, which was just bizarre to me. But I certainly wasn't going to argue. I was incredibly grateful. It's wild looking back to see that, I mean, I don't know how many words are on this album. Let's say 1,000 words. 1,000 words changed my life. It changed my entire life's trajectory. And it ended up being on the cover of Time for ushering in a new era. That's crazy that 1,000 words could do that. For me, that's what's so wild, you know, looking back. And to think that Who'll Save Your Soul was the first song I wrote. I wrote it when I was 16. And to have that be my first single was crazy. And I remember feeling pressure, like I didn't mean to write a radio hit. I don't know if I can ever write one again. But then I started selling 1 million albums every single month, and it kept up for over a year. And I realized I won the lotto. I didn't ever have to have another radio hit. I never had to be as successful as I was at that moment in my life because I had the biggest back end. I was making a lot of money. And so I got to do whatever I want. And so I took that advice that Bob gave me and Neil Young gave me of do what you want. And so I just started to have a career doing whatever I wanted, switching genres if I wanted, taking years off if I needed, to keep that promise to myself of my mental health and my artistic health.
I'm not going to lie. I'm also a little hung up on the fact that you were like opening up at one time for bands like the Ramones. And I'm trying to envision you on stage, like asking someone at one of those shows to leave and come back when the headliner comes on. Whether it was throughout creating this reissue or at any other point, especially in this social media age where everybody has a camera, could you imagine doing something like that now?
Definitely. I'm certainly the same. I remember with the Ramones, I got an entire audience to rush the barricades and jump over them and come forward to the stage where there was nobody. I think it takes a certain kind of suppleness to be a writer. You have to be sensitive. But you also have to be insistent, you know, that you're not background music and to be taken seriously. And nobody gives it to you. You fight for it.
We're chatting with Jewel here on USA Today's Entertain This. I'm Ralphie Aversa. Let's talk about the title track because it's funny how things change and then they don't at the same time. And in this song, you address people who are racist, people who are homophobic, people who have different prejudices, regardless of what they may be. And, you know, I thought about if that song was released today, how, because of how divided this country is, some people would hear that and others would hear you being a racist or a homophobe. And then I read that 25 years ago, that was the case as well. You were accused of that, even though you were speaking out against it. What was it like to release that song back in the mid-90s? Releasing
the song Pieces of You, yeah, that song's been pissing people off for 25 years solid for sure. I love playing the song because if people aren't listening, they get very offended, which proves the point of the song, I suppose. But the idea that hatred starts a lot of time with small misogynies and then it grows, you know, if it's unchecked into full on Yeah, full on hatred. And that it has to be something about us that we're not comfortable with. Otherwise, we wouldn't hate it so vehemently. It must be pieces of us we're uncomfortable with. I actually just wrote a new song called Hate Hate. That's my updated version of that song. I'll have to send it to you. It's pretty bold.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear it because, here we are, I hear you talk about, microaggressions and how this starts and we're still having that conversation today. I mean, how do you feel about that? And I guess certainly too with your work trying to help others. I mean, is this conversation gotten any easier? Has it gotten more difficult?
What we don't understand grows. And something I really hope we get right during this next cycle is that you can't discount and disassociate factions of society. The Tea Party became MAGA because it was misunderstood and chastised and disassociated from. And if we do that now, it will resurface as something more vehement and entrenched. The only way to transform things is to understand them. The only way to transform things is to bring them closer and say, I want to hear what you need. What do you need? If we don't hear what people need on either side of the fence, if the red team won't do it for blue and if blue won't do it for red, I don't see this getting better because people want to be tolerated, but they don't want to tolerate.
So true. Do fans still ask if Adrian was a real person?
Fans do still ask if Adrian was a real person.
What's the reaction like now?
It disappoints people. Sometimes I've had fans feel foolish or fooled because they fell in love with this character that they believed was real and they felt a little duped. But the sentiment is why I wrote this song. We, especially during the 90s, nobody was talking about what is it like for people that have different abilities, that have brain injuries. How do families make it? So that's why I wanted to write the song.
And when I was listening to the song Daddy, I was, I guess, a little confused. I know, obviously even just now, but throughout your career in public life, you've been very open about your personal life and your upbringing as well. I know you left home because I believe your father was an alcoholic and correct me if I'm wrong, but he was abusive as well.
Yes.
And then what I found, I guess, and it's tough because what do I know? I'm not a part of your family. But you did return home at some point. So were those fences mended? How are they now?
Yeah. Yeah. Daddy's an interesting song. I didn't write it about my dad, but I did write it in first person. So my poor dad spent most of his life with people thinking this song was about him. But my dad's an artist and a songwriter and really gets and understands storytelling. Daddy is about racism, and it's about this idea of nature versus nurture. I was obsessed with this idea of nature versus nurture. How do I overcome my nurture and get to know my real nature? It's why on the cover of my album, I have the quote that says what we call human nature in actuality is human habit. So a lot of our own qualities that we say, it's just my nature. It isn't. It's your habit. What could I do to change those habits? So Daddy is this look at somebody that hates themselves and is haunted and then says, but what's it say about my upbringing? At the end of the song, you realize the father is a racist and he climbs out his window in his white hood. That is not my dad. My dad was not a racist. And I'm sure some of my own youthful anger was in that song. Absolutely. I did grow up in an abusive household. My dad and I do have a really amazing relationship now. He's a miracle. In his 60s, he got sober, and not just sober and not just apologize, but actually changed behavior. And for somebody in their 60s to face a mountain of shame and abuse that he had as a child, to then face his own transgressions and learn how to heal it's incredible. And I get to know an amazing human now that I never thought I'd get to know. It's been an incredible gift.
I remember reading about one of those times you returned home after performing on Conan O'Brien, and that, to various degrees, ended up being a life-changing television performance because that was, I guess, from what I read, how you linked up with Sean Penn, and the two of you obviously having a romantic relationship, but you also writing Emily for his movie The Crossing Guard, and I know that's included on this 4-volume reissue. Originally, I think it was only on it was a bonus track on the New Zealand edition of this album. When you think back to Emily, that song, what comes to mind?
Yeah, nobody knew I had dated Sean. Actually, nobody knew until I wrote my biography about 5 years ago. But he was such a supportive and pivotal figure in my personal life, albeit I never, again, was public with that because I was determined that is not what I would be known for. But he really believed in me and has to this day been such a good, nurturing friend, really believing in my talent. And Emily's one of my favorite songs. I dealt with the topic of loss of a loved one a couple times, and Emily was my first go at dealing at that very heavy topic.
It's interesting that you talk about not wanting to be defined back then by a personal relationship and rather your actual work as a professional, as an artist. Artists, I feel like, are still struggling with that. You talked about reading a book and knowing about the numbers in the music industry. That's one thing, but where did the foresight come from to understand, like, yeah, this wouldn't be a good look?
I grew up bar singing with my dad since I was 8, and I remember a man put a dime in my hand when I was 9, and he folded my fingers around it, and he said, "Call me when you're 16. You're going to be great to sleep with when you're older." I grew up in that kind of environment where I saw what women would give away for a sweaty, drunken compliment. And I realized that that attention wasn't necessarily personal. It was the inertia of loneliness. And it made me be very, very clear about my energy and my sexual energy and what I wanted to be known for. And the reason I was able to turn down my boss when I was 18, who wouldn't give me my paycheck when I wouldn't have sex with them, it's because I had a lot of practice. And I had this oddly prideful belief that nobody could leverage me if I didn't allow myself to be leveraged. And I believed I deserved to be known for what was in my heart and in my talents. And if I was never known, that was fine with me. I wasn't willing to be famous more than I was willing to make sure that I invested in my humanity. And that was something, for some reason, I had from quite a young age and continued because of those two promises. I wanted to make sure my job was to be a happy human, number one, and to always choose music over fame. That's what caused me to make choices like not being public with Sean, or turning down things like what was it called? The Real World? That first reality show? I was offered a slot on that when I was homeless, and I turned it down. It definitely would have made me famous right away, but it wouldn't have been for the reasons I wanted to be known for. And I would rather not be known than for reasons I didn't think were sincere.
How does a casting agent from the real world run into you while you're homeless?
It was once I got signed. My record label came to me and they were, like, "You wouldn't believe it." I hadn't even made my record yet. They're like, "We could watch you make your record on a reality show." And that wasn't even a genre, right? They invented reality TV with that series. And I turned it down because it was not going to be good for my mental health. Nobody needed this living in a house with them. I was a show. And number two, it isn't how I wanted to be known. I wanted to be known as a singer-songwriter, not because I had roommates that I'd probably get in arguments with or however they did it.
Okay, as I mentioned at the top of the interview, this reissue is 4 volumes, both streaming and the physical copy of it as well. And then with the physical copy, there are so many other additions to this experience. What do you hope your fans who maybe first fell in love with you when this album dropped 25 years ago take from this reissue?
It was hard to find music and releases that would surprise my fans. They're really avid bootleggers. They have thousands of unreleased songs of mine. So I was able to go back and find an entire live performance from the Interchange when I was 18 or 19. And it's a bit embarrassing. It's like having your most awkward high school photo where your bangs are bad and one eye is half shut. It's like having that photo come to life and talk for an hour. But it's very honest, and I think gives you a real look inside where I was at, which was emotionally courageous and not that talented at guitar playing and all the unfiltered thoughts that came out of my mouth. But hopefully fans will just see what it takes to evolve, that you don't start perfect. You just start somewhere.
As much as your fans, I'm sure, will love this, I'm sure they're also wondering when your next album is coming. It's been about 5 years since you've released a studio album?
Yeah. I actually have a record ready to go. The record's more of a soul bent probably this time. I've never written for my voice. I don't know why, but I'm a much better singer than I've written for. And so I was determined to write for my voice more. And I see why middle-aged artists do drugs to get a new sound. Like I see why almost every artist that's had a long career, like just doubles down on acid trips at this point. Because not doing it was very hard work. To come up with something that felt authentic and innovative and not reactionary to any prior version of myself took a lot of work. I wrote probably 200 songs to get 12 that I liked, that I'm proud of. It was a fist fight with creativity, but I'm really proud of what I did.
Did you create these like throughout the pandemic? Was it something you started working on before Stay at Home started in March?
It was prior. Yeah, I released a song called Grateful and another song called No More Tears during the pandemic. But the bulk of the album hasn't come out.
Gotcha. And when can we expect it, you think?
I'm not sure. People can check out Grateful and No More Tears now. No More Tears definitely, and Grateful sort of show the sort of soul bent that I'm heading into. And then we'll just see. It's a new world releasing music right now, and we'll just see how it goes.
Hate's going to be on there too, right?
You know, I'm thinking of, I haven't even released my album, but I'm thinking of doing a folk EP along with it. And I definitely want to get you that song. I'm dying to see what people think.
I love it. Pieces of You 25th Anniversary Reissue is out on Friday. Jewel, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you. Bye.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this video, check out these other videos from USA Today Entertainment to stay up to date on all of the latest celebrity news.